Good afternoon, everyone. All right. So, Black liberation. We're going to get black in here. Good afternoon, everyone. Look, when I say food justice, you say movement. Food justice. Food justice. When I say black lives, you say matter. Black lives. Black lives. Thank you. We have coffee back there if you all need something. And we did just legalize marijuana for recreational use in the state of California. So if you need to pick me up, just take a step outside, come back, because we need your energy. My name is Bryant Terry, and I am, thank you. I'm going to be moderating this fantastic panel. I am currently the chef in residence at the Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco, MOAD. No, we do not have a kitchen, nor do we have a cafe, but I create programming for the public around the intersection of food and public health and farming and art and culture and blackness. I have a couple of books, and I think it's important for me to note that my work around these issues started off as a grassroots activist. In fact, I was a graduate student in history at NYU, and my research at that time was looking more deeply at the survival programs of the Black Panthers and learning more about the Free Breakfast for Children program, the grocery giveaways, and seeing these same issues that persisted. You know, seeing young people on the subway drinking sugary drinks and energy drinks and juices and Red Hot Cheetos, and knowing that there was these similar issues around the intersection of poverty, malnutrition, and institutional racism moved me to start working more deeply in this movement that we now describe as food justice. And I want to just say that there was this moment for me where I decided that I needed to leave New York and I wanted to move to the Bay Area and focus more on writing. And I had this moment of guilt where I felt guilty about leaving this NGO that I started and doing more public speaking and writing, because I had imagined activism in a very narrow way. You know what I mean? Like, I thought about activism as being on the ground and the grassroots, being in the streets, and it is all those things. But I had to really reimagine for myself what activism meant. And I understood that being a public figure, writing books, having a national platform could be just as important to this movement as being on the streets and in protests and working with young people. I don't know if anyone before me or to this day has talked about food justice on the Martha Stewart Show. And so I want to encourage all of us to kind of broaden the ways that we think about activism and being kind of central to this movement that we understand as food justice, because when we think about like this metaphor of like drops in the bucket, right? Each drop is minuscule, but the kind of groundswell of drops can like actually overflow, have the bucket overflowing. And we needed someone to create this visual for us. You know, we need the people who are at the university at Cal, who actually run this institute, who actually convene this or, kind of like catalyze it. We need people in the kitchen, we need journalists, we need scholars. So I really want us to understand that there are many ways that we can be active in this movement outside of the traditional ways that we think about activism. Y'all feeling that? Yes. Cool. Thank you, a couple people. So we're gonna just get into it. I want to start by introducing, well, I need to say this as well. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. Another thing I want us to hold today is, and I don't want to go as far as saying that the food justice movement is colonized, but some people might say that. I'm gonna let them say that. But we're gonna use it as we'll use it as a placeholder right now about the need to decolonize the food justice movement. And I think a lot of people imagine the food justice movement as a largely Black and brown movement. In many ways it is. If we think about, like, as Judy just talked about, the Black Panthers, I would say their work is a precursor to what we might imagine as a contemporary food justice movement. Some of the most brilliant and creative work in communities that's owned and driven by the people who are most impacted by hunger and food insecurity is happening, in Black communities. But when we think about the larger picture and we understand the philanthropic organizations who have been largely funding much of the work in the food justice movement and pretty much directing the shape of that movement because of their dollars. These are largely white-driven organizations with mostly white board of trustees, mostly white staffs. When we think about many of the NGOs that are working around health, food, and farming issues, many of them have white executive directors, a lot of white program directors. When we think about many individuals who come in the most impacted communities of color in urban centers with the very altruistic and sincere desire to make change, so many of those people are white. And I think about the early 20th century and the kind of emergence of the social work, the field of social work. And I think we have to understand these dynamics at play in the food justice movement. The emergence of the field of social work, there was this dynamic where you had largely privileged white women who were kind of patrolling the boundaries of class and policing the behavior of poor people, poor immigrants from Europe, poor folks of color. And I'm sure that, as a matter of fact, by show of hand, how many people have seen this same type of dynamic kind of play out in the food justice movement today, right? So I want us all to think about how can we, for lack of better words, decolonize the food justice movement. Y'all feel me on that? Okay, cool. I know some of y'all aren't, but that's okay. We're gonna get to that. We're gonna unpack it, and by the end of it, you're gonna be like, okay, I'm feeling it now. So I want to start by introducing our panelists. We'll introduce each person, allow them about 4 to 5 minutes to speak, and then we'll open the floor up to questions from you all. So first, I want to introduce my brother to the left of me, David Roach. If you don't know David Roach, you probably just moved here from Oklahoma. No, but for those of you who have recently moved to the Bay Area or who are recently getting involved in food justice work, David Roach is one of the OGs in this movement here in the Bay Area. When I came here for the first time in 2003 to teach classes with the People's Grocery in West Oakland, I met David, and he's been a friend and a mentor since then. He is truly committed to transforming communities, and not just around food. He understands that food is a part of the conversation, but the multiple issues that communities are dealing with, and he's looking at through the lens of economic development. In fact, when David, he's a alumnus of Morehouse College, where he started thinking about these issues, and so much of the foundation of his kind of ideology was inspired by Booker T. Washington, if I'm correct, and the work that he was doing down at Tuskegee. And David holds a lot of the kind of pre-gentrification historical memory of what's going on with this work. I know that Gail Myers has this fabulous farmers market in Temescal now, the Freedom Farmers Market. But if you didn't know, David started the Mandela Farmers Market that was adjacent to the West Oakland BART. What year was that, David? Am I just telling your whole bio? Am I just like... Okay. So a long time ago, David started a mostly black farmers market that was sourcing from black farmers and that were selling culturally relevant produce to black folks. And so he is also a committed educator doing work in some of the most impacted communities in East Oakland, at Castlemont, and I think he's currently teaching at McClymonds in West Oakland. And so one of the things that I hear David, kind of his mantras and the mantra of his work is every school should have a garden, a farmer's market, and a grocery store. And so I'm gonna invite David to come up and talk a little bit more about his work. And I want to ask you to reflect on this question. Given all the obvious limitations of working with schools, specifically segregated schools in our communities, how do you imagine them playing a role in this food justice movement?
I guess I could use this mic here instead of that one there. Thank you all for having me. Thank you for that great introduction. And just to kind of take in everything that was said, I want to just thank Ms. Judith for speaking, the keynote speaker on the Panther Party. It was amazing. Where is she in the audience? Oh yeah, thank you so much, and your work, inspiring. So I think that as we talk about Black liberation, what we're talking about is we're talking about the liberation of the planet. We're talking about becoming stewards of the planet, saving the planet. We're talking about going beyond, because everybody has to eat, everybody's gonna need those oceans, everybody's going, we all need that to survive. And so we can't so when that's been under resistance for so many years, it's affected the whole planet. And by us having our rightful place on this planet, a lot of these issues that we're having will be resolved. So when I started teaching at McClymonds High School, actually Castlemont High School, let me go back a little bit. How much do I have, 3 minutes?
You got 3 more minutes.
Okay, I got probably 2.5 now. So yeah, I was inspired by Booker T. Washington. How many are familiar with Tuskegee, Booker T. Washington? Yes. And so for those of you who do not know, it was one of the, Booker T. was born in slavery, went to Hampton Institute, and he walked there from the coal mines and got jobs along the way and became a professor there later and was given a chance to start a college in Tuskegee, Alabama, that he founded in 1881. And this school became the Tuskegee Normal School, and it was based on agriculture as being the basis of developing a community. And so he thought when he got there, he would see a building and bricks and things, and basically what he saw was a big old field, and he said, we gotta bake bricks. People thought he was crazy. He created a kiln, and it failed 3 times, and the 4th time it actually worked, and then they were producing about 200,000 bricks a year, building their own buildings. About 40 buildings still stand today at Tuskegee. And he read about this guy named Dr. George Washington Carver, who was the first African-American to receive a master's at Iowa State. And he took over, he wrote a letter to him and said, I need you to help me do this work. And he responded by saying, this is a note from God. And he actually, because Carver was in this mystic kind of religious organization at Iowa State, and he said, this is a note from God. So he came to Tuskegee, and he ran the ag department, and they started using peanuts to fertilize the soil, bring the nitrogen back, and because cotton had taken all the nutrients out the soil, and they started baking their own bricks with the kilns, and this school still stands today as a model that Marcus Garvey and others out of Jamaica wanted to recreate. And so as you were talking about 1920, this is the organization of the UNIA, which is the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which oftentimes, how many of you know about Marcus Garvey? Okay, so this part of our history oftentimes not talked about, because we talk about liberation, we're talking about self-governing, we're talking about creating economics and trade. We're talking about Garvey setting up the Black Star Line, which was a way to trade with Africa and throughout the diaspora, Cuba, here in America. And so those kind of foundations really inspired me when I was a student at Morehouse College studying economic and public policy. And to find out that these kind of models, all these years in school, nobody talked about them too much. And then later on to find out groups like the Black Panther Party were doing their good work, which I'm so glad was actually described here today. So as we talk about liberation, one of the things I've been really working on, I think I might have about 20 seconds left. So is to every school to having a garden, a farmer's market, and grocery store, but also every school having a student government association, a parent-teacher association, and an alumni association. Those groups organize, collaborate, they're called familyhood, and they run their garden, their farmer's market, and their grocery store. And our work is to connect them all, and that way we can build more sustainable communities from the students upwards. Thank you so much.
So can we have an honest conversation about transforming the way that food is produced and consumed and transported and all those other issues in our community without talking about the problems of capitalism and the way in which we need to think about alternative economic systems, because late capitalism is just not working out for the people who are most impacted by food issues. I'm just asking the questions. What do you guys think? Can we talk about anti-capitalism? Can we have that conversation throughout the day? Okay, I don't know, that's why I just asked. So next up, I want to invite Kelly Carlisle to come up to the mic. This is one of my sheroes, my heroines. If you all don't know about the work that Kelly's doing, she's doing some revolutionary work. And I think one of the things that is so powerful about everyone who's up on this stage is going back to this idea about the work of liberating our communities needing to be owned and driven by the people living in those communities, by the people most impacted by the issues in those communities, and I think that's a thread that we see on the stage. Kelly is doing work in what people would describe as maybe Deep East Oakland. And one of the things that excites me about Kelly's work as a parent of two young girls is how the foundation of her work started by her just kind of thinking about approaching it as a mother, right? And thinking about feeding her child. I'm gonna let her talk a little bit more about it, but her organization, Acta Non Verba, is doing some just amazing work with kids K through 8. They have a summer camp. Yes, they have a food and farming summer camp where you can drop your kid off in the morning, and not only are they, learning about agriculture and healthy, cooking techniques and just appreciating an abundance of food, they're also having fun. So please give a round of applause to Kelly Carlisle.
Hi there, how y'all doing? Yeah, you're alive. We're all post-Trump, right? Today, as you're seeing me pull my phone out and check my text messages, we have 50 people from our community out in Muir Woods right now having a community field trip. My shtick is to work with kids, because kids don't know anything, so we're kind of the same. You could tell them stuff and they're like, really? And I'm like, right? Whereas adults are like, you tell them stuff and they're like, well, and. But what we discovered doing our work, and how many of you are familiar with our work, Acta Non Verba? Excellent. So for those of you that are not familiar, okay, that's nobody. It's raining and there's people that have never been hiking, so I'm just like, But for those of you that don't know, we have a 1/4-acre farm near the Coliseum that's run by kids age 5 to 13. The kids plant, harvest, and sell the produce that we grow, and 100% of those dollars are placed into individual development accounts for the kids. These funds can only be used for educational purposes, and it's based off a study that says that kids are 6 times more likely to attend college if they have a savings account, meaning that it doesn't need to be huge, it doesn't need to be, thousands and thousands of dollars, but that someone cared enough to invest in their future. I don't really care if the kids go to college or not. I want them to know that somebody is investing in them. I want them to invest in themselves. I want them to look around themselves. Thank you. Go ahead, please. I want them to feel like they deserve everything good that this world has to offer. If Similac is not the business, we shouldn't be having Similac in Deep East Oakland and communities like ours either. If non-organic lettuce is gonna make you break out, we should not have that in our communities either. Each child should be able to articulate, I deserve the opportunity to live and grow and thrive just like any other child anywhere else, at least in this country, right? I mean, once we start comparing ourselves, once we start looking, from the flatlands to the hills, from Rock Ridge to Deep East and, the lower bottoms over in West Oakland, once we start doing that, once kids start to understand that there is something absolutely, and I'm going to use the word, I've been told not to, unfair in how we're living, that's when I think that we're going to be able to have kids raise their voices, right? That's when we're going to have kids that know and understand that, no, I don't want to live in an area that has a giant crematorium spewing out stuff over my playground, right? I don't want to live next to a demolition plant that's got, stuff coming off of the concrete, that you're breaking up. I want to have a place where I can live, work, play, breathe easily like other kids across the United States. Does that make sense? So, thank you. So my daughter is 12, and she stopped coming to these things with me because I always bring her up, right, in different ways, like whether it's breastfeeding or hot chips. But the other day, she got in the car, and she's not speaking to me. I said she's 12, so she's hey mom, and then she's all in her earphones, and she's like texting her friends and whatnot, and I'm listening to a book on tape, so I'm like, cool, right? But she looks over, or she's eating, and I look over at her, and what is that? What are you eating? And she's chowing down Flamin' Hot Chips. On my life, I pulled the car over, and I'm like, do you know who I am? Do you know what I go through to keep those things out of the hands of, that's why we don't give babies money, right? Then she says, I didn't buy them. Like, nice, really nice. Who are your friends, right? Again, starting at home, starting as a mom, starting as somebody that, grew up in this system, in the capitalistic, a pill for every ill, food being available to me whenever I want it. I'm the kid that said, I don't care where the chicken came from, it came from the stove, right? I mean, I know that. I know that deeply. To not have come from a food justice background and not have been having those thoughts placed in my head. So now, as an adult, I really have to talk to myself and then spread that word about what do we deserve? What do I deserve? What does my daughter deserve? What does our community deserve? We deserve to have folks invest in us, and for us to understand that we're investing in ourselves every time we spend that dollar, every time we open our mouths. Thank you very, very much.
When I was working with young people around these issues in New York City, we talked about the psychic violence that children have to deal with every day, where they see ads and billboards and jingles telling them to eat the worst foods, telling them to drink the worst beverages. Do you all know that the food and beverage industry spends about $1 million per hour marketing the worst foods and the worst beverages to eaters, to consumers? But what's criminal to me is that they start as young as 2 years old, these young, impressionable minds trying to create these loyal consumers. So we need to circle back to the whole capitalism conversation. Next, well, I'll say this. When I first started doing this work, I argued that two of the most powerful sites to transform the way that Americans are eating could be schools and faith institutions. And the two sites that gave me the most resistance were schools and faith institutions. So it makes, I can't even tell you how elated I am to invite our next speaker, Pastor Michael McBride, AKA Pastor Mike. I had heard about Pastor Mike, but I'd never heard him speak. And then I was listening to just arguably the most awesome podcast out these days. You guys know Politically Reactive with W. Kamau Bell and Hadi Kondabolu. It's an amazing podcast. I heard Pastor Mike on there, and he was talking about freeing white folks from whiteness and, just this, black liberation thread throughout his talk. And I was just so impressed. And I was like, I want to be friends with him. And I actually was supposed to be emailing Pastor Mike. Pastor Mike Smith, are you here? There he is. I was trying to email Pastor Mike the other day, but I accidentally emailed Pastor McBride because we were supposed to be doing a workshop. But I think it was my subconscious way of saying, I want to be friends with you, Pastor Mike. So Pastor Mike is a native of San Francisco. He's been active in the ministry for over 20 years. He is now the lead pastor at the Way Christian Church Center in West Berkeley. And his work has focused on the reduction of, largely focused on the reduction of violence in communities, as we often kind of imagine violence. But one thing we talked about in the early stages of putting this conference together is how do we think about hunger and food insecurity / food injustice as forms of violence that many communities have to face. And so I, in addition to talking about some of the work you're doing, want to ask you, Pastor Mike, what role do you see faith communities in general playing in creating more healthy, just, and sustainable food systems? Pastor Mike McBride.
Well, I'm certainly glad to be here. I often say when we begin to talk a conversation about violence that there's not been one day in the history of this country where Black, brown, and indigenous people have not been subjected to arbitrary violence at the hand of the state. And often, you know, we go certainly as we should to physical violence, the kind of violence that, you know, ended up having the one I follow, Jesus, you know, end up on the cross. You know, I often say we got to reclaim Jesus because often Jesus is thought by many people to be a Michelangelo lookalike with pale skin and a bad perm. But Jesus I follow is a dark-skinned Palestinian Jew who was born in a hood called Nazareth to an unwed teenage mother who was targeted by the state his whole life and ended up being unjustly arrested, convicted in a kangaroo court, and executed by the empire of his day. And that Jesus is a Jesus of liberation, a Jesus that is very concerned with not just the soul, but also the body. That Jesus made sure he fed folk before he talked to them. That Jesus made sure that if his folk didn't have nowhere to sleep, he slept where they slept. He was a homeless guy. By his own words, he said, foxes have holes, birds of the nest have, birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay my head. So when we talk about violence, as we should talk about the physicality of violence, we must also talk about the violence of lack, or at least the violence of scarcity. That is often a result of public policy. Public policy that would see the problem and the misery of Black folk to be a problem only Black folk can solve. And whenever we need more than the help we have within our own communities, that help is always through police and jails. So for us, I think when we're talking about the faith community, what role can we play? Our role is to hopefully radicalize and transform our imagination and help us see that there is something, a greater way of living that is not overdetermined by the American empire, that is often only seen the issues of dark-skinned bodies and dark-skinned people and the lands in which have produced these dark-skinned bodies and dark-skinned people as something to exploit, as something to lord over and break the will and the mind if we do not comply. I find in some of our work, as we are trying to develop a theology that is anti-capitalistic or at least anti-exploitation, that sometimes going to our sacred text can be helpful. It's important to keep appreciating that even though in this moment church is often over-determined by capitalism, there has always been a very strong anti-capitalist construction and sentiment within Black church constitution throughout the years. One of my good friends, Otis Moss Jr., he said that there are 160-something slave rebellions that were chronicled by some scholar, and 150 of those 160 or so slave rebellions originated out of the Black church or Black religious spaces, which makes me ask a question: what has happened to our Black religious spaces when our minds are often seduced by the gaze of whiteness, white supremacy, or at least reaching for whiteness and white supremacy? Part of what I hope faith institutions, particularly our religious institutions, can do is offer a different vision. So one of the things that I lift up to our congregation, we were trying to have this conversation about food and about gathering. The early text, the early church, the followers of Jesus who met every single week since the death of Jesus and the resurrection, communities all across the world have always been gathering every week to do two things: break bread and remember the teachings of Jesus. The role of eating and breaking bread together has always been a hallmark of our religious gatherings. In the text, it also talks very much about everybody not just breaking bread, but holding all things in common. That people shared their possessions with one another. That the early church was known not for its dogma, but for its charity, for its generosity, for its hospitality, for its ability to welcome those with much and little and share all things in common. So one of the things that I think we can do is create space in our communities and even in the way we shape and form people religiously to recapture radical hospitality, radical sharing of what we have as a way to dismantle the capitalistic white supremacist forms of living and occupying space that has us radically individualistic, believing that we are always our own source. I'll head to my seat, but I was tickled when my dear sister was talking about the Cheetos, because my first couple years here in the city of Berkeley, I was serving as a director of student services at BTech, or East Campus, the continuation school here in the city of Berkeley. And many of the kids were coming to school hungry. And the only food that they could afford to buy was the hot Cheetos and Top Ramen. What do you call that stuff? Top Ramen? Cup of noodles. It wasn't Top, but it was Cup of noodles across the street at the liquor store. And one of the things that one of the mothers in my congregation whose child was going there, she was so upset about it that we organized the mothers, Black and Latino mothers, to pretty much walk across the street and just give it to the liquor store owner. And they began to make sure they had fresh fruit in there for the young people while we were there. Other options besides this processed food. And what that did for me is it helped me to appreciate that it does not take as much as we think to transform the options of food that are accessible to our loved ones. That's a micro example, but I do believe as a pastor and a congregation president on that campus, we were able to do something pretty amazing in creating some different alternatives. I hope that is something that we all can collectively do, realizing that our worst obstacle in the Bay Area won't be Donald Trump to getting this done. It'll be the average progressive person that we walk by every day who will still not believe that the pain of their brother and sister and loved one is the pain of their own. So very glad to be here with you.
Can we organize some of the Black churches to radically reactivate these amazing industrial kitchens that have been sitting there dormant for like 2 decades? Have y'all seen that before? Have any of y'all been to a Black church? So I've seen these across the country, and I'm just thinking, wow, what if we actually reactivated this kitchen? We can be using them to, create and serve community meals, incubate small food-based businesses. I mean, there's so many things. And there's this adage that there's a liquor store on every corner in the Black, or many corners in the Black community. Well, there's probably a church right across the street. So can we give a big Bay Area round of applause and welcome to our next panelist, Shanice Alexander, please? So Shanice is originally from Detroit, Michigan, and she recently moved here from Chicago, 2 cities that have their own just brilliant on-the-ground activism around food justice. And she most recently was the director of the employment training at Growing Home, which kind of looked at urban farming and transitional employment and job training, focused on people with multiple barriers to employment. She is now the director of the Oakland Food Policy Council, And I'm hoping that her presence there helps to diversify the council members, because it is a largely white council. And I think we need to think of creative ways of bringing in some folks of color from the most impacted communities to be on that council and actually drive some of the ways that food policies are happening in Oakland. Y'all feel that a little bit? Okay. I really, from what I've read about your work, I appreciate the way in which you understand the need to kind of simultaneously do the on-the-ground work while keeping one eye on making public policy change. And so I want to invite you up, but one of the questions I want to leave you with, if you have time to address it, is, just that. How can we kind of thoughtfully do this on-the-ground activism with the understanding that we have to keep one eye on creating, public policy change on the national level, on the state, as well as the local level?
So y'all really got me going after the pastor. Like, I'm really mad about it now. Because that's what you do. That's what you do. And it's so moving. And that's not what I do. But I'm going to talk anyway. So, yes, I'm new to the Bay Area. I'm new to Oakland. And one of the biggest things for me, being here for about a year and a half or so, is the activation of my Blackness. Right? So, from Detroit, born and raised in Detroit, spent 4 years living and working on the south side of Chicago at an organization called Growing Home, which is an urban farm that had a workforce development program. I started at Growing Home as a part-time program assistant while I was finishing my master's of social work. I am a social worker. And so that experience for me, being a Black woman as a social worker, going through Jane Addams School of Social Work in Chicago in a very white space, has a really big impact on what I do now. I take it with me wherever I go. So my experience at Growing Home was program. People are coming here to get jobs. They're learning how to farm, yes, it's a thing, but they need jobs. They can't buy this food if they don't have the money to get it. And so working under a Jewish male executive director, a Jewish female operations manager, a white female development director, and then me, the program director, coming up against this constant battle of, we are on the south side of Chicago, and as much as you want to drive what you want to drive within getting food to this community, we have to be realistic about what the needs of this community is. And so for me, that was a very, very hard struggle to deal with. But it got me to the place where I am right now, working on the policy end, which is where I've always wanted to be. Very excited that I've had the opportunity to work on the ground. I remember one of my college professors told me that if you wanted to go into administrative, high-level, macro-level social work, it's always best to start with direct service. I never wanted to be a clinical social worker. That's not what I wanted to do. But in that position, I learned what it meant to actually work for the people that I was working for. And there's such a huge gap between direct service, programming, and policy because people don't necessarily have that experience. So I'm excited to be able to bring with me that direct service experience into my policy work now, because I really think that it influences the way that we look at these pieces of policy that we're actually putting out there. I want to reference the schools, right? So school food, some of the worst food in the public school system that you could have. It's probably like prison and then schools, right? Less than $1 a day per child to serve a week food to our students who are in public schools. So it's really bad. And I'm really happy that Oakland Unified School District is moving toward creating better food options for young people, because if we're thinking about, and I'm going back to the social work, if I haven't eaten all day, or if I'm eating Flamin' Hot Cheetos, which is a thing, because I did it too, if I'm not getting any nutritional value, I'm not having breakfast, and then you expect me to pay attention in class, or you expect me to not get into physical, or verbal altercations with my colleagues, which is normal. I just want to throw that out there too, because we criminalize youth of color for normal behavior. But you expect that of me when I'm not eating. And for schools to really have, there's an increase in a movement toward having more farms and gardens at schools. That's a real thing, and it's awesome. But the policy within the procurement within our school system is that most times you can't use the food that you grow in those gardens in the cafeteria. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. So at the policy end, and for all of us to really be able to start thinking about what's happening on the ground, whether it's our lives, our friends' lives, our neighbors' lives, our families, kids that we don't even know, but this is their experience, what's happening on the day-to-day that we can take to city council and we can take to these institutions, the schools, the universities, the hospitals, to say, look, we need to align this. I don't care about your contract with, these capitalist businesses that are all about just making money. I don't care about that. I want my kids to have good food. So those are the types of things that the Oakland Food Policy Council is moving toward. We're working with the Oakland Unified School District to have them take on the good food purchasing policy, which they're voting on November 30th, hopefully. It's been pushed back a few times, which is the exciting part of policy. It just takes a really long time. And there's a lot of things that are out of our control, right? So that's why a lot of people aren't really excited about it. But we need to be excited about it in collaboration with what's happening on the ground. Growing up in Detroit, working in Chicago, the one thing that I've noticed here is that this just energy behind grassroots organizing and the movement of the people to actually influence what's going on at different levels is huge. It's in those places as well. It's in Detroit and Chicago as well, but it's different here. And I think it's different here because of this. You have a panel of all people who are Black. I have never experienced this, and I've lived in several places, right? I've never experienced this. So to be in a situation and in communities and have conversations time and time again about what's happening within our communities as Black people, as people of color, with white people, we have to have this influence. It's so important to have that. So I'm super excited to be here. I forgot your question. I answered. So since I think I have some more time, I'm just going to keep going. 20 seconds. Oakland Food Policy Council meets once a month, every third Thursday at 1000 Broadway in Oakland. We focus on procurement, we focus on urban agriculture, we focus on economic development and security and food access. We have work groups. You do not have to be a member to participate in those work groups. You can come and really guide the conversation about what the needs are within your community and for yourself. I need that. I need people to be in those conversations, even if you're not coming every week, because it really influences the work that we do. So, thank you.
All right, where are we with time? 15 minutes, okay, good. We'll have a lot of time for Q&A. So next, I want to invite Carissa Lewis to the stage. She is the interim executive director of the Center for Third World Organizing. She's a program director for People's Grocery, and she's a leader in the Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter. So she's about it times 3, or maybe to the third power. So Carissa describes herself as a Black radical farmer. She is actually the co-founder of Full Harvest Urban Farm in East Oakland. And she does a lot of training and organizing around just direct action and mobilization. And so one of the things I'd offer, or I'd like you to offer the audience, is how can we think about bringing more of these tactics into the food justice movement? And also just thinking about these, because, so one of the things that I have to say, I feel like everybody on this panel understands this and really lives this in their work. Really understanding that lack of access to healthy, fresh, affordable food is simply one indicator of material deprivation in a lot of the impacted communities, right? And so we can't look at that in isolation. We need to understand the larger ways in which systemic poverty plays out in these communities. And so just as, tactics that we can bring to the food justice movement, but kind of spreading them more widely as we think about resisting fascism over the next 4 years. Okay.
How y'all doing? Cool. Good to be here. Hey, boo. So I also travel with my child. I thought that she would run out. I travel with her because she's just a cheerleader. She's great. She has on a sleigh shirt because she always slays. So yeah, I'm from East Oakland, and I work at the intersections of food justice, Black liberation, and training the next generation of organizers and activists. From early on in our Black Lives Matter Bay Area chapter, we've been pretty clear that state-sanctioned violence encompasses more than just police brutality, right? But that not having access to clean water like folks in Flint, not having access to healthy foods, gentrification and displacement, poor education, those are all forms of state violence. That's perpetuated against the Black community in Oakland and across the country. So I'm really interested in having a few conversations in the food justice movement. The first one is, how do we blacken the food justice movement? Here in the Bay and across the country. I thought I wasn't gonna be able to talk because Brian Terry was about to say everything I wanted to say, which was great. So what we call those organizations are snow-capped organizations. Organizations where the directors or the board are white, and everybody that they're servicing, and even sometimes line staff are Black folks. What that does is that reinforces a white savior complex condition, and it actually doesn't allow Black folks to step into their leadership and their power. So I think that's one conversation that we need to be having in the food justice movement. Another conversation that we need to be having in the food justice movement is the consequences of white folks coming into our communities, starting urban gardens and displacing local residents. Because oftentimes folks come and they either are coming on some, I'm here to push back against police brutality, or I'm here on some food justice stuff, and their specific presence in our communities increases police presence. It increases the devastation that police have on our communities. And so those are some of the questions that I think that we as the food justice movement need to tackle. Super excited to be on this panel with other folks who are leading in the food justice movement, because we know that there are organizations that aren't Black-led. So really excited to just be here with these folks. And then I think that we need to be thinking about, what are some additional tactics? So I'm a firm believer in a diversity of tactics. I think there's a definite need for policy work. But when we think about this current system, this system is working exactly as it's intended to work. It's not broken. It is working to oppress communities of color. Folks' access to white power and to white privilege also is dependent on their level of how much anti-Blackness they want to embody, and that's included in every ethnicity in this country. And so we really need to be thinking about new tactics. One, how are we creating our own systems that allows us to divest from the current systems, and not creating other extractive, exploitive systems, but really envisioning regenerative systems that allow folks to thrive and heal. How are we utilizing direct action as a tactic? So direct action oftentimes gets frowned upon by folks in the liberal community. And when we think about the roots of this country, and definitely the roots of Black folks, direct action has been an intricate role in our ability to get free. Everything from grinding up glass and putting it in master's food, to the civil rights era, to the current rebellions happening all across the country for the fight for justice for Black lives. No, it's not my time. Cool. So direct action is a tool that can be utilized. It does a few things outside of putting pressure on folks who have power to meet demands. It allows us to exert our rights. It is deeply, deeply healing and transformative for the folks who participate in the direct action. And so figuring out how do we do that, specifically in a place where we're seen as progressive. So everybody in Oakland, we're patting ourselves on the back, right? We didn't vote for Trump. That's the middle of the country. But on my local listserv in East Oakland, I have folks who say, 2 AAs walking down the street, be careful. So I responded and said, I'm actually quite terrified of 2 EAs walking down the street as well, right? So even in progressive hotbeds like Oakland, there's levels of anti-Blackness and oppression that my community faces. And so being really clear about that and about how folks are gonna engage that. And I have a few thoughts on how folks could engage that. So the first thing, trust Black women, period. Trust Black women. So when we look at the election results, and to be clear, I'm not a Hillary supporter. I think her form of neoliberalism is frankly quite dangerous and scary. However, when you do look at the election results, Black women were the highest population that voted a progressive down ballot. Only 6% of college-educated Black women and 3% of non-college educated Black women voted for Trump. That's compared to 30% of Latinos, 53% of women, 62% of white women and white men who all voted for Trump. So when all else fails, find a Black woman in your life. Trust her. Maybe we can start an organization called Phone a Black Friend, because we have been feeding you, we have been watching your babies, we have been clothing you, and we have been leading the revolution, and we will continue to do so.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes before we go into the breakout sessions. So I want to open up the floor to actually have questions from the audience. And I want to do something that may be a little different, but I actually would like to privilege Black folks who are asking questions. So if there are any number of folks who want to ask questions, if there's a Black person, move out the way, let them get in the line before you. So is there a mic going around? Yeah, that's you. Okay, great.
Thank you for what you're doing. Knowing the power of words, right? Why do we not, as a community specific, as a community generally, remove the word job and talk about career and business? What is that about?
I think that's because of the generation that we're living, and we're responding to our folks who work to get a job, a good job, to take care of their families and save money and all that stuff and get educated to get a good job. I think now we're transitioning to what you're talking about. We realize it's about creating our own career. It's about developing new businesses in our community. And so I think that's where we're headed. I think, that's where we're going right now, is as we talk about the, connecting the dots of the small farmer to the community. It's more than just saying we have access to fresh fruits and vegetables in our neighborhoods. It's more about how can we generate, knowing there's a demand there, how can we supply that demand, create jobs by having the careers and businesses that I think you're referring to.
And to be clear, this conversation will continue in the breakout sessions. And if there are any people who would like to lead a session, just come up to us afterward.
Hello, y'all are just so amazing, melanin magic everywhere. I'm a fourth year undergraduate at UC Berkeley, trying to navigate the PWI. It's been a lot of white tears this past week. Honestly, I'm really fearful going into the public sector. And the ways in which y'all talk about how, to engage, the nonprofit industrial complex and really, pander to, the ways and systems are still rooted in white supremacy and ruled by white people. How do you effectively push your agenda forward and speak truth to power without, dealing with micro instigations of kind of the white lash, or white fragility, and how you take care of yourselves and also take care of your communities.
Yeah, okay. So for me, that's really it, right? How do I, where the vast majority of our supporters are white people in terms of funding and in terms of donations and so on, how do I weather a white lash, right? And the answer is sometimes we don't. We've lost funders, we've lost donors. It's really random. When I started AMV, my father said, "You're black, the community's black, just go ahead and say it's a black organization." And I'm like, no, coming from here, Berkeley, right? No, it's open to everyone, the whole community, yes, right? And then I go around and I do talks like this, and I'm on panels, and I get anonymous emails calling me racist because I talk about black people and black food and Black Lives Matter. And what I've come to realize is there's really, if there's gonna be white tears, there are gonna be white tears. If folks are upset because I'm speaking my truth, and more than just speaking my truth, but speaking truth about the community that I serve, right? Not making it, for $10 a day, little Johnny can learn where carrots come from, to be true and to be, really real. We do lose people, and I don't have a magic. I took off my filter from Facebook, right? It's completely public now, right? So now folks can check me out, see if they like my politics, and if they don't, then please don't make a comment, okay? Because my friends come for you.
Can I add something as well? So the reason I moved here from Chicago is because I was burned out from that. I was constantly dealing with having to be that representative for the 90% of participants of this program who are black, right? And so many times at the age of between 23 and 25, I'm talking to this 50-year-old Jewish guy about how we're not gonna use this person's picture and say that they were addicted to heroin and they live in this neighborhood and put all their business out in the street on Facebook because we need to raise some money, right? And that just happens so much in the nonprofit field. And it's just no, these are people. And I don't know if you understand how Facebook works, but everyone has access to it. Their kids have access to it. We really have to, it's a really, really sore spot for me. The programming and development relationship is really hard for me to navigate when people are involved. And I think that because I am so people-oriented and I am so, specifically oppressed people in telling their stories and making sure that they're telling it and you're not just using it so you can bring in money that's really not even gonna affect them. You're just gonna use it to have more events to bring, it's just, so I think it's gonna be that, and it is what it is. And I think self-care is one of the most important things that you can do. Is if you feel like you need to step away or take the time to just be with yourself, do that. Because if you're burned out, you're no good to anybody, and it happens. And it's we have this thing where specifically for black women, we're supposed to be strong all the time, and that's just not the case. So if you have to cry, if you have to yell, if you have to hit something, do that. Not a person or animal or kid or anything, but if you need to take the time to make sure that you can work through those feelings so that you can be as good at your work as you can be.
And also, I just want to piggyback, and I just want to say that you represent UC Berkeley as well. And so I think that you should really connect with some of us up here and actually get Berkeley involved with helping these organizations. So when you graduate, you also have a nice tie-in. You know, you can learn from our mistakes and you can help build, because oftentimes we don't find folks, you know, at Berkeley who, oftentimes Berkeley comes in and says, hey, you know, we're doing a dissertation. We really want to follow you around and we want to know how you're doing this good work, right? But we really need you to come in from the outside, like look at how those mouses get out the maze, but more like we got resources here, we got research and development departments, and we can help fundraise and help build what you have, you know, through our body. So hopefully you can tap into what's going down.
Hello. I just wanted to know how the results of the presidential election have impacted or deepened your sense of importance of the work that you're doing, if at all.
Y'all could hear me. So it's interesting. I don't think that I had as visceral reaction like in my body as a lot of folks, and in particular a lot of white folks have had. It feels similar to when the Occupy movement started, when the middle of America and middle class America realized that our economic system wasn't shit. And black folks are like, yeah, unemployment rate has been like over 18% in the black community for a while now. And so like, we knew that white supremacy ruled this country. What has become, what was surprising, so a few things that were surprising to me. One, and they shouldn't have been. So one, I identify as black before I identify as a woman. It is how I'm perceived in this world and how I respond to that perception. I realized through this election that white women identify as white first before they identify as a woman in a lot of cases. So that was interesting to me. The second thing that was interesting to me was the level of grace and not grace that I'm willing to have with white folks who need to debrief that situation. So I can have a little bit of grace with y'all if there's an understanding that you need to have grace with us when we're actually not here, to dig into some of that pain that y'all are struggling through. And then the third thing that I think is the biggest lesson for potentially folks in this room and for folks to share is that we got us. Like it's literal brilliance up here. And so there's a level at which we actually need white folks to go organize other white folks. And your impact will be felt much greater than, say, working at a community organization where your main constituents are people of color. Like, build up the leadership of a person of color in your organization so they can take over some of that role. And you should go organize your community, because there's a level at which they just don't want to hear me talk.
And maybe can I just say real quick, there's one of the architects of the Black Church Studies movement in like the 1930s. His name was E. Franklin Frazier. He wrote to black churches and black pastors that his strategy for addressing racism was to have every black church close their doors and go integrate into a white church. So it will force the conversation around the kind of immorality of racism, the contradiction of racism and a segregated church. And I'm working on a article called Why the Evangelical Church Needs to Be Born Again. Again, right? And one of my proposals is going to be for every evangelical church to close their doors and go sit under the teaching of a black, brown, Asian, or woman lead pastor, so they can hear the gospel from a voice that is not overdetermined by domination, power, and control. And one of my reactions post the election is that I am very struck by how even our most progressive white brothers and sisters and loved ones don't believe our country is as bad as it is, right? And right in plain sight, you have lots of suffering people who are constantly saying in Berkeley and Oakland and San Francisco, that there are massive problems, not little problems that need tweaking around the edges, but massive problems of inequality, of degradation, of exploitation, of hunger. And for some reason, the election of Donald Trump has ripped a mask off of capitalism and racism and xenophobia and homophobia and Islamophobia in a way that has really rocked a lot of good, well-meaning white folks. And it is somewhat of a mystery to me because it shows me that we can be in proximity to one another as progressives, but our voices still do not penetrate our conversations. And so, I looked up at the screen just to remind myself that we are here talking about Black liberation and the food movement, with Black liberation being like, I think the top billing on this. I would love for all of us in here to I think Carissa said it wonderfully, to privilege the voices of Black women, Black folk, brown folk, folk who are literally having to wake up every day and struggle against a system that as soon as we walk outside the door, it is a strike against us. It is not to say that white folk don't have struggles and white folk don't have problems and your problems aren't real and your problems aren't the same as the problems of other folks. But I do think there is an opportunity for my white brothers and sisters and others to really appreciate that the power that has been wielded by largely white male folks for centuries has gotten us in a terrible predicament. And it may be that the way forward is to start to listen more deeply, not over-personalized when we start talking about white folks. You start, in your mind, well, I'm not that. I'm not them. I feel attacked. But to listen deeply about the ways in which leadership, power, and as my dear sister from the Black Panther Party said, self-determination of oppressed peoples could actually save this country from unraveling right before our eyes. Because I do believe that if we as a country do not change radically what we are doing, the people in international spaces that we all love and are working with as well will continue to feel the very worst outcomes because of our inability to fix and get right this issue that we're talking about, whether it's Black liberation or the liberation of oppressed peoples in this moment in time.
So we have time for one more question. Yes.
All right, this one's going to go out to you, Brian Terry. To the whole panel, but it's more towards your question around capitalist systems. So, I'm hearing a theme, throughout the panel, throughout the questions, and it's this question of dependence versus self-determination, and talking about these capitalist systems and how they need to go. And I'm curious to explore the question of what are we replacing it with? You talked about regenerative economic systems, and what are we replacing it with to support our ownership over our lives, over our jobs or careers? And what are we creating? What are we reclaiming?
Great question. I'll just quickly say, I've been tormented by this very question ever since Ferguson, because I think that was the first time I had to have a real honest struggle around ideology and realize that it's easy to tear something down, but it's very difficult to actually create something alternatively. So I do think some of our work has to be around exploring ideology, right? And having a constructive conversation about that which we will replace. I'll just say for myself, as a follower of Jesus and someone who takes seriously the biblical text, the scriptures, it is very much more communitarian than it is capitalistic. It is very much more interdependent than it is capitalistic. And even in the earliest forms of Black religious tradition in at least the United States, most of our folks were socialists. So I don't believe that socialism is a silver bullet. anymore that I believe capitalism is a silver bullet, but I do think we should begin to think about principles that honor the humanity and dignity of every person, and imagine how can we then start to construct something that is around principles and not necessarily around a prepackaged economic system that we may not know yet, given the complexity of the kind of diversity we have in our communities.
Yeah, and I'll just add really quickly that I think one of the challenges is that we actually don't give ourselves enough time to dream and vision. As folks who are always operating from a place of scarcity or a place of resistance, that we don't do a lot of that visioning. And I would echo what Pastor McBride just said around it being more around the through the lens of communal versus capitalism. I think the other issue is that, these conditions make it harder for us to imagine putting other economic systems on top of these current conditions because the conditions are just so incredibly different than when other economic systems thrived or operated. But I think it's gonna have to be rooted in folks' reclamation of culture, folks' reclamation of radical togetherness, and in deep, deep love.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I hate this thing. I was going to say that one of the principles that and values that we really push for our youth, our campers and our after-school youth is to give more than what you take. Give more than you take, right? So we look at the farm, we look at how we're growing, we're talking about how we're nurturing the plants and how we're, growing the plants and what the plants can give back to us, right? But we know that we have to keep the soil deep. We got to keep the soil healthy, and we have to give it more than what we take. Our peach tree only gives us maybe a dozen peaches a year, but we fertilize and we, massage it and we prune it and we talk to it. We literally talk to it. But to make sure that that plant feels loved and understands that we're willing to give too. We're willing to give more than whatever we're gonna get back from the tree. That makes sense.
And I'm gonna say really quickly, because Brian told me to be real quick, because that very question is what's kept me in my garage for long hours, and just trying to figure out this for the most part, manufacturing model of capitalism, which says that we build roads, we build houses, and that's how we develop neighborhoods. Natural resources are the most important part that we can exploit. But the work that Kelly does, working with young people, those are human resources. And so the more that we tap in and raise the children to get a part of what we're doing, we're manufacturing the next group of people that can actually lead, as we move forward. And so that has been, I've been working on this Made In model, which is made in Oakland, made in Berkeley. We're developing websites because we want to also have another revenue stream using the internet to really support our own mission. Because oftentimes we have to rely on funding from others when we can really generate our own revenue ourselves. And so we can talk more about that later because I don't want to move on the program, but I really appreciate that question because we need to be more independent. Thank you.
So as I said, we will continue these conversations in the breakout sessions, but can we please give these brilliant panelists a loud round of applause?